Here's what Bernie had to say to all the senators today, though. Fucking ride with Bernie, man. I fucking love that man.
What we are seeing is a situation where Netanyahu himself has never favored a two-state solution, and he has made that very clear and has worked to systematically undermine the prospects for a deal. And I might mention that a two-state solution is the policy of the United States government. His party's, Netanyahu's party's founding charter, reinforced in the current coalition agreement, says, quote, that, quote, between the sea and the Jordan River, there will only be Israeli sovereignty, end quote. For many years before October 7th, Netanyahu told his allies in private that it was important to bolster Hamas to ensure that the Palestinians could never unify and form their own government. In January, in terms of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, Netanyahu said, and I quote, we provide minimal humanitarian aid. If we want to achieve our war goals, we give the minimal aid, end of quote. The rest of the government, or many others in that government, is similarly extreme. At the start of the war, the Israeli defense minister declared a total siege, saying, quote, Israeli defense minister, we are fighting human animals, and we act accordingly. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. End quote. Another minister at the start of the war posted a picture of a devastated area in Gaza, saying it was, quote, more beautiful than ever, bombing and flattening everything, end quote. Another Israeli lawmaker said, quote, the Gaza Strip should be flattened and there should be one sentence for everybody there, death. We have to wipe the Gaza Strip off the map. There are no innocents there, end quote. Several officials have openly talked about reestablishing Israeli settlements in Gaza. The current intelligence minister, among others, openly talks of permanently displacing Palestinians from Gaza. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who oversees the police, has long advocated for the forceful expulsion of Palestinians from the region. This is the current Israeli National Security Minister. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, responsible for much of the occupied West Bank, has likewise long expressed extreme racist views and has called for the expulsion of Palestinians from their lands. He has called for segregated hospital wards for Jews and Arabs because, quote, Arabs are my enemies, end quote. As a younger man, he was arrested by the Israeli authorities on suspicion of anti-Palestinian terrorism. That is the man who is the current Israeli finance minister. Mr. President, this is a significant part of Netanyahu's government. Those are some of the people whose war we are subsidizing. We can pretend to ignore all of this. We can pretend that today's Israel is the Israel of 20 or 30 years ago, but that is just not the case. And the reason I raise these issues and talk about some of the people in the Israeli government is to understand that what is happening today in Gaza is not an accident. It is a bringing forth, a doing of what many of these people have wanted to do for a long time. It should come as no surprise that this extreme government in Israel right now is not simply waging a war against Hamas, and Israel has the right to defend itself from the terrorist organization Hamas, but it is at war with the entire Palestinian people and fighting that war in a deeply reckless and immoral way. And that is why the Netanyahu government has consistently ignored President Biden's requests that they do more to minimize civilian casualties, that they be more targeted in their approach, and that they let more humanitarian aid in. And so, Mr. President, given the attitude and the beliefs, the racist beliefs of a number of people in the Netanyahu government, let us take a look and see what is happening today in Gaza. We all know that Hamas, the terrorist organization, began this war with a horrific attack on Israel that killed 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, and took more than 230 captives, some of whom are still in captivity today. And as I have said many times and repeated a moment ago, Israel has the right to defend itself, but it does not have the right to go to war against the entire Palestinian people, including women and children. Mr. President, let's take a deep breath and listen to some of these facts. And no one disputes these facts. War is about 6.5 months old. More than 34,000 Palestinians have been killed and 77,000 have been wounded. 70% of whom are women and children. 70% of whom are women and children. That means that 5% of the 2.2 million people in Gaza have been killed or wounded in a 6.5-month period. That is an astronomical figure. The number of people dead and wounded, the percentage of them, 70%, who are women and children, is almost beyond comprehension. Mr. President, 19,000 children are now orphans in Gaza, 19,000 having lost their parents in this war. And when you think about the children in Gaza, literally it is hard to imagine. Imagine a 7-year-old in an area where the whole community has been flattened, where there's massive death, where there is no food, there is no water, you have no schools. Your parents may or not be alive, relatives are dead. That is what the children in Gaza are going through right now. And I doubt that any of them will ever fully recover from the psychic trauma, the terrible, unbelievable trauma that they are experiencing at this moment. And Mr. President, the killing has not stopped. Over the weekend, 139 Palestinians were killed and 251 were injured. Of these, 29 were killed in and around Rafah, including 20 children and 6 women, one of whom was pregnant. Just today, more news emerged about mass graves found by Palestinian health authorities and UN observers at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis and the Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. So far, more than 300 bodies have been found. The UN Human Rights Office reports that the dead include elderly people, women and wounded people, and that some have been bound and stripped of their clothes. Some of these bodies apparently had their hands tied, the UN said. Mr. President, what can we say about this horror? Roughly 1.7 million people, and it's, again, hard to understand. Maybe think, members of Congress, think about your own state and what this would mean and look like in your own states. Remember, we're dealing with a population of 2.2 million people, which is about 3.5 times the size of the state of Vermont. Roughly 1.7 million people, over 75% of the population, have been driven from their homes. It's not a community which has been forced to evacuate in order for a military action to take place. This is 3/4 of the population driven from their homes. Satellite data shows that 62% of the homes in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, including 221,000 housing units that have been completely destroyed. A number of months ago in Vermont, we had a terrible flood, and dozens of houses were destroyed, and I saw the impact of the destruction of dozens of houses in today. What we are seeing is a situation where Netanyahu himself has never favored a two-state solution.